Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Government ministers have dismissed the accusation of a former senior colleague that too little effort is going into securing a new Brexit agreement with the EU. Amber Rudd, who resigned from the cabinet last night, said today that the vast majority of Brexit-focused work was going towards no deal and that there were no formal negotiations with Brussels. She's also called the expulsion of 21 Conservative MPs opposed to no deal an assault on decency and democracy. The Chancellor, Sajid Javid, says the government hasn't given up on a deal and is sticking to plans to leave at the end of October, come what may. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake reports.
From Cabinet Minister to backbench MP overnight, Amber Rudd walked out of government no longer believing the Prime Minister's priority was to get a new Brexit deal.
This morning I'm joined by the now former Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd.
This morning she explained she could see little evidence of efforts to reach an agreement with the EU.
There is this huge machine preparing for no deal, which is fine. You might expect in the balance between getting a deal and no deal 50-50 in terms of work, but it's not that. It's like 80-90% of government time going into preparing for no deal, and the absence of actually trying to work to get a deal is what has driven 21 of my colleagues to rebel, and I need to join them.
Expelling those MPs that voted against the government was an act of political vandalism, the former Work and Pensions Secretary had written in her letter of resignation.
I know I couldn't carry on in the Conservative Party at such a high level and see 21 of my colleagues who are good, moderate people who also want a deal excluded from it. And I just needed to move and stand by them.
Will Brexit ever happen, sir?
The Chancellor said he was sad at what had happened, but defended the Prime Minister's strategy and hit back at Amber Rudd's claim that the government wasn't trying in earnest to get a new Brexit deal.
I am absolutely clear that we are working wholeheartedly, straining every sinew to get a deal, and the Prime Minister is personally putting in all the significant effort you would expect from a leader to get this deal done.
Mr. Frost, what's on the agenda today?
In Brussels this week, the UK's top official having regular meetings. But the EU's chief negotiator reportedly described talks as in paralysis. Downing Street say negotiations have been constructive, but acknowledge the two sides are still far apart.
Here we go.
The Prime Minister's been in campaign mode this week for the election he wants to avoid asking for a Brexit delay. Opposition parties say not until leaving without a deal is ruled out.
I don't trust him an inch, and I don't think anyone does. I think that we've got a Prime Minister now who's saying he won't even abide by the law. By the law? I've never heard that before. Now, we're in a situation now where no one can trust, while he's in place, what can happen.
Keeping away from the cameras at Chevening, the government's countryside retreat, the Prime Minister met his closest advisers, perhaps plotting his next move. The promise is still to deliver Brexit by the end of October. The unanswered question, how? Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, let's look ahead now to the next few days and weeks and what might be in store. Tomorrow, the government will make a second attempt to call a general election, but that requires the support of 2/3 of MPs and is expected to fail. The government's then expected to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks. On the 17th of October, there's the key EU summit in Brussels, where the government says it hopes to agree a Brexit deal and leave on the 31st of October. But if there's no agreement, then by the 19th of October, the new legal deadline imposed on Boris Johnson because of the law pushed through by MPs comes into force. It requires the Prime Minister to either persuade MPs to agree to leave with no deal at the end of October, which is highly unlikely, or it says he must ask the EU to delay Brexit, something that he has insisted he will never do. Well, today the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said the government was scrutinising the new law in the hope of finding a loophole.
We're always going to behave lawfully as a government. Of course, you'd expect that, and anyway, it will be challenged in the courts. But what we are going to do with that legislation is test very carefully what it does and doesn't require. And that's not only the lawful thing to do, I think it's the responsible thing to do.
Let's go back now to Jonathan Blake, who's in Downing Street. That's the view of the Foreign Secretary. Jonathan, what is your overall sense of how Downing Street is going to proceed?
Well, Michelle, it's as plain as ever tonight that the Prime Minister has absolutely no intention of asking for an extension to the Brexit process if he can't get a deal at that summit in mid-October, despite that legal requirement as a result of the bill passed in Parliament this week. And as you heard the Foreign Secretary there giving a strong suggestion that although the government intends to abide by the law, it will look for a way around it. And to those MPs preparing a legal challenge if it tries to do that, the message from government seems to be, we'll see you in court. Tonight, Boris Johnson does appear to have held off any further cabinet resignations by others in government who share the concerns of Amber Rudd at Downing Street's overall strategy. And there is no apparent change in that overall game plan to deliver Brexit by the end of October, come what may. But what their tactics will be in the days ahead, we just can't say. This week, as you said, Parliament is due to be suspended, possibly by the end of tomorrow, possibly as late as Thursday. However long this week in Westminster is, we could be in the same position. No breakthrough in sight in Brussels, no election to break the deadlock. Then again, everything could change, and quickly.
Jonathan Blake, thank you.
The government is standing firm tonight after being rocked by the resignation of another senior minister. In a shock announcement, the Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd said she could no longer tolerate a leadership that was failing to work for a Brexit deal. While the government fiercely deny that claim, they are still looking for ways to avoid asking for a Brexit extension. The Foreign Secretary said today that they would test the legislation very carefully and go to court if necessary. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks has the latest.
The ex-Work and Pension Secretary leaving her house this morning.
I'm not going to say anything, no. Thank you very much.
But about to say plenty on her reasons for abandoning Boris Johnson's government, having lost faith the Prime Minister really is doing enough to get a deal with the EU.
There is this huge machine preparing for no deal, which is fine. You might expect in the balance between getting a deal and no deal, 50-50 in terms of work, but it's not that. It's like 80-90% of government time going into preparing for no deal, and the absence of actually trying to work to get a deal is what has driven 21 of my colleagues to rebel, and I need to join them.
And she had this warning about the direction of the party.
I think that we win as the Conservative Party by showing our values, which are moderate, strong, proportionate, one nation values. And if we become a party which has no place for the type of moderates that I am, the sort of centre-right Conservatives, then we will not win.
Those still in the cabinet scrambled to insist that, on the contrary, huge amounts of unseen work was going into efforts to get a deal.
The Prime Minister, on day one, he set up a group of his most senior ministers, most senior advisors that have been meeting 2 to 3 times a week, working almost exclusively on getting a deal. There's been numerous meetings in Brussels.
They have taken nothing to Brussels.
There's been numerous bilateral meetings with EU member states. I've had a number of meetings and discussions. The Prime Minister, for example, is going to Dublin tomorrow. There's more meetings in Brussels next week, and there has been progress.
Okay.
Environment Minister Therese Coffey has been hastily moved into Amber Rudd's job. Others, like the Health Secretary Matt Hancock and the Lord Chancellor Robert Buckland, have had to deny they might be thinking of walking out too. Labour, still behind in the polls, have plenty of new ammunition.
I have a lot of respect for Amber Rudd, and she wouldn't resign without having a serious concern about what's going on in government. And it's quite clear that despite all Boris Johnson's commitment that he will negotiate a deal, what she's exposed is actually there's virtually no work going on in government at the moment for that deal, and therefore I think he's trying to deceive the country.
Boris Johnson, who in a week has lost his majority, 2 ministers and the escape route of an early election, is doing nothing to dampen speculation he's considering not complying with the law that would force him to ask for a Brexit delay. The Foreign Secretary sent out to say this today.
We will adhere to the law, but we'll also, because this is such a bad piece of legislation, the surrender bill that Jeremy Corbyn backed, we also want to test to the limit what it does actually lawfully require.
Tomorrow, the Prime Minister will ask the Commons again to back an early election and will head to Ireland for talks on ways to avoid a hard border there. Getting the outcome he wants on either front is looking as distant as ever. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Well, today the Lord Chancellor, whose very job is upholding the rule of law, confirmed that he has held talks with Mr Johnson this weekend. But with the law now changed to compel the Prime Minister to ask for an extension if he can't get a deal, he faces a dilemma. How does he stay in power without breaking his promise to leave on October the 31st? Dan Rivers explains.
The Prime Minister may have had the week from hell, but things might be about to get even more difficult. Despite the bullish talk and photo ops, he appears to be heading towards a dilemma Brexiteers in his party will hate: delay Brexit or break the law. The new law requiring him to ask the EU for an extension if there's no deal will get royal assent tomorrow ahead of Parliament being suspended. Now, his own Lord Chancellor's been forced to publicly say he's had to remind the Prime Minister about the consequences of breaking the law, tweeting, "We've spoken over the past 24 hours regarding the importance of the rule of law, which I, as Lord Chancellor, have taken an oath to uphold."
This is truly astonishing. We need to reflect on what's taking place here. The Prime Minister is threatening to ignore the law of the land. Now, this is absolutely unprecedented in our constitutional history, that Prime Minister is going to ignore Parliament, going to ignore the law.
Those close to the Prime Minister suggest they're looking for ways to legally avoid asking for an extension. Experts say the High Court has plenty of powers to force the Prime Minister to obey the law.
If the High Court were to order the Prime Minister or anybody else to do something and that individual didn't, well, then that individual would almost certainly be in contempt of court. That individual could be fined. That individual could potentially be sent to prison. Of course, there's a much quicker way around it. The High Court has the power to tell somebody else to sign the letter on the Prime Minister's behalf.
But precedents are being broken everywhere. Today it was confirmed the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, will be opposed by a Conservative candidate in any forthcoming election, breaking the long-held convention. They stand unopposed. Dan Rivers, ITV News.
Well, let's go back to Romilly now. Boris Johnson clearly doesn't want to ask for this extension. Were he to, would he even get one?
Well, the French have just chucked some more oil on this already raging fire by suggesting they might veto an extension because of what the French Foreign Minister describes as a worrying lack of progress towards a Brexit deal. So despite all Sajid Javid's insistences about these talks that are going on, the French say they haven't received any realistic proposals about an alternative to the Irish backstop. Would they actually go that far is unlikely. They made similar protestations before granting the last extension, and this one at least is for something concrete, i.e. an election. But it does show the level of frustration in Europe about what's going on here. As for this epic battle that's playing out for the soul of the Conservative Party, there are still those in the party who believe that this extraordinary take-no-prisoners, scorched earth policy that Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's special advisor, is executing so ruthlessly will play well with voters who just want Brexit to be delivered. But there are increasing numbers of MPs who are increasingly nervous about what Plan B is.
Yeah. Romilly, thanks very much indeed.
A relatively uneventful day in British politics then. A Cabinet Minister, Amber Rudd, explained why she's quit the government and Conservative Party in the Commons. A Labour pro-Brexit rebel, John Mann, is quitting as an MP. Another former Labour MP, Angela Smith, has joined the Lib Dems. The Conservatives threaten to run a candidate against the Speaker, John Bercow, against all political convention. And there's speculation other Cabinet Ministers are on the verge of quitting. Darshana Soni reports.
The opening of the Nottingham Mellor, a celebration of British Asian art. But as voters contemplate perhaps another general election, another of Boris Johnson's ministers is refusing to dance to his tune. The now ex-Work and Pension Secretary Amber Rudd has quit the cabinet with an outspoken attack on the government's approach to Brexit.
When earlier in the week I asked Number 10 for a summary of what the planning was for actually getting a deal, I was sent a one-page summary. So it's the combination of the fact that there's not enough work going into actually getting a deal, which is, I think, is not what the Prime Minister signed up to try to do, and secondly, the expulsion of 21 of my colleagues who are good, moderate Conservatives.
And so the 21 are now 22, with speculation that others could follow.
We will leave anyway. Even if we don't, we will leave anyway on October the 31st.
The resignation comes after a week described by Mr Johnson's critics as calamitous. A cross-party group of MPs seized control of the parliamentary agenda, voted through a bill to block a no-deal Brexit, and then rejected his call for a snap election. But will the Prime Minister's manoeuvres please the crowds? His strategists are framing the events as merely the opening moves in the battle of the people versus Parliament. How will voters view it in a city that was almost evenly split between Leave and Remain? Sharik Sadiq travels the country with his food stall.
Boris Johnson says he's just doing what people voted for. People voted to leave. That's what he's trying to bulldoze through. What do you think?
I mean, that's fine. We voted to leave. However, the way he's gone about it is wrong. We need a deal. We can't leave the EU without a deal.
I really don't know what's going to happen. I think it's just absolute chaos, and it's really frightening for everyone.
Don't understand what's going on. It's all confusing between both parties. Even if Labour wins an election, I don't think they'll be any better.
Really? You haven't got confidence any of them?
Not either of them. If there's an election, I don't know who to vote for.
Enjoying the mellow with his family, John Holden describes himself as a Labour leaver.
But you voted Leave.
I did. But
so isn't he just doing what you wanted, what you wanted to vote for?
He wants a no deal, full stop. Boris Johnson just wants he's playing the game. His ultimate goal is obviously to be the kind of hero of getting Brexit through.
After a discordant week in Parliament, we've seen politics turned on its head. And now the Conservatives, traditionally the party of law and order, are reportedly considering how to defy the law.
The Foreign Secretary has said the government will look carefully at the interpretation of the law blocking a no deal.
Because this is such a bad piece of legislation, the surrender bill that Jeremy Corbyn backed, we also want to test to the limit what it does actually lawfully require.
We expect the Prime Minister to abide by the law. If he doesn't, obviously we'll do everything we possibly can. There will be others, I'm sure, who will legally challenge him if necessary. But we're hoping he sees sense and just behaves like a Prime Minister.
The legislation should gain royal assent tomorrow. The political tempo isn't likely to get any slower, as Mr Johnson has been warned he could face legal action if he chooses to flout it. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News, Nottingham.
So, more extraordinary things to come this week. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me. I mean, let's start with Amber Rudd and its significance.
What Amber Rudd did was slightly different from what Joe Johnson, Boris Johnson's brother, did. She challenged quite explicitly Boris Johnson's judgment in getting rid of those people out of the party, but also his word. She challenged the whole idea specifically that there were real negotiations going on in Brussels at all. I'm told that she came to the decision on Wednesday night, and that tells you something else as well. She waited until Sunday, a day when the government quite often likes to sort of try and pivot the news back somewhere where it can work better for them. This was very preconceived, targeted, intended to undermine. And when you look at the decision to wait until Sunday, and also bear in mind the fact that she's talking about standing under different colours at the next general election, and there are these conversations going on amongst former Tory MPs, now independents, who intend to run again, about how they're going to interlink maybe with other parties. One former minister floating the idea of taking a soft Lib Dem whip. You just get a sense of the intent of these people. Will they deliver? That's one of the questions people at Number 10 throw back at you. But the other question they throw back at you is Amber Rudd always was flip-flopping, and who's heard of her anyway?
So what happens tomorrow and this week?
Tomorrow, what's meant to happen, what's in the diary to happen, is that Boris Johnson is going to rerun the vote that tries to trigger an early general election on October the 15th. It's just possible he doesn't do it, but it's expected still that he is going to press that button tomorrow to try to unease Jeremy Corbyn and others who will not vote for that. It won't succeed. October the 15th will not be the date of the next general election. And then Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's senior aide, was telling people in Whitehall at the end of last week, no question, we're sending all the MPs home. So prorogation should start tomorrow as well, that controversial prorogation. Prime Minister is going to be meeting Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, but the real focus, I think, is what happens a little bit further down the line. If there is a European summit at which there is no sign of a deal whatsoever, does Boris Johnson sign the letter, but the bill the MPs passed requires him to sign and send to the EU requesting a delay to the Brexit date? You heard Dominic Raab alluded to there, a line that's coming out of Number 10. We have different interpretations, they're saying, of the law. They're not being at all specific about what those interpretations are, but I'm told senior civil servants are laying down the law and saying to coin a phrase, laying down the law and saying quite clearly that civil servants will down tools if it looks like the Prime Minister is not obeying the law. Again, what's Number 10 saying back to all of this? They're saying that look at that opinion poll today. It shows a Tory lead increasing. All of these things that we're talking about not necessarily having an impact with a key set of voters who one day, maybe later in the autumn, maybe the beginning of the winter, might just get a chance to cast their verdict on all of this in a general election.
Thanks, Gary. Well, joining me now from West London, the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve. He was one of the 21 Conservative MPs expelled from the parliamentary party for defying Boris Johnson over a no-deal Brexit. Well, you heard what Dominic Raab said. They think this is a very bad law that you've got yourself involved in, and they're going to test the limit of it in the courts. They're going to take you to the Supreme Court, bury you in judges, and then no deal happens. Is there any danger of that?
I don't think so. They're fully entitled to test the law as much as they like. But I think the law is very simple and very straightforward. And if the Prime Minister won't implement it, he will be challenged and taken to court. And I think the court will direct that the law must be implemented and the letter must be written.
Are you worried at all by the opinion polls that suggest voters aren't going in your direction, they're going in Boris Johnson?
No, I'm not. I'm well aware that Boris Johnson is pursuing a populist, reckless and frankly pretty disgraceful course of action. And yes, I have no doubt that that may have some immediate attractions. But what's important, I think, for people like myself is that we should go out and make absolutely clear that what we're trying to do is to reduce the risk of catastrophic damage to this country, which he seems to be quite willing to contemplate. And he's not telling the truth. He says he wants to pursue no deal because it's the weapon to get him the deal. And yet we've just heard from Amber Rudd that in fact there is no attempt at getting a deal at all. My view is that he's a really quite serious menace now to our democracy. And it worries me very much. And it's not in the Conservative tradition at all. And so what we've got to do is to try to get this message simply across.
Are you the Conservatives who were purged by Boris Johnson from the parliamentary party? Are you now effectively a new political party? Is that where this is heading? Are you working as a group?
We're certainly working together, but I don't think I would describe ourselves as a political party. We're a group of independent MPs. It's only 3 days since we were chucked out.
But when it comes to the election, is what I mean.
Well, when it comes to the election, I shall stand as I've explained. If the election takes place while Brexit is still unresolved, I will stand as an independent in the Conservative tradition in my constituency, and it will give my constituents the opportunity to decide what they want. It's up to them, but I shall do that. And I think that's what my fellow Conservatives will do. Some may decide to join other parties, I don't know. And it's possible that we will, in fact, it's not just possible, it's highly probable that we will work closely together. But I think that's different from setting up a new political party.
So this idea of taking a soft Lib Dem whip, working with the Lib Dems on votes, is correct?
It's the Liberal Democrats and ourselves have cooperated closely in recent months over the threat that a no-deal Brexit poses to our country. So cooperating with the Liberal Democrats is perfectly feasible, but that's a slightly different thing from saying that we are going into a formalised alliance or being merged into the Liberal Democrats. But I'd like to emphasise we are 3 days since these events have taken place. And I'm certainly not going to be rushed. I want to try to do what I think is best for my country. That's the line I'm going to take. And I'm prepared to cooperate with people of all parties, including my own party, the people from whom I've been parted by the Prime Minister, to try to achieve that.
This is going to boil down, though, when it gets to the election, whenever it is, to a choice when it comes to the Prime Minister between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson promising no deal and Jeremy Corbyn promising a second referendum and possibly Remain. Are you going to end up saying to British voters, Corbyn is better than Johnson in that scenario?
I think your comments, if I may say so, are thoroughly premature. I have no idea exactly when the general election is going to... Well, I think they are premature, actually. I have no idea exactly when the election is going to take place. It may well be that there is an election at the end of this year. But the circumstances in which that election takes place are likely to be even slightly different from where we are today. I'm perfectly aware that most of Jeremy Corbyn's policies are ones with which I fundamentally disagree. I've made that point on many occasions. I'm a Conservative. But the national interest, I think, will become clearer as we get closer to this election. What I am absolutely satisfied about at the moment is that leaving with no deal never featured as a promoted offer by the Leavers in the 2016 referendum, that the evidence suggests that leaving with no deal will damage every man, woman and child in a really palpable fashion in this country. And my recommendation to the Prime Minister is if he wants to do this, he should go back and get confirmation from the British electorate that that's what they want. If that is what they want, I'll never raise the subject again.
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to let this Prime Minister drag this country out to such a dangerous and risky future without doing that.
Well, that does mean, maybe it's premature, maybe it's months away, but that does mean people are going to say to you on the doorstep, Mr. Grieve, when it comes down to it, you're a Conservative. Do you want a Conservative government? Or do you think it's better to have something else?
Well, I think what I will be saying to people on the doorstep at the election is they know what I stand for and the point of view I wish to put over, and I would like their vote. That is the essential issue in the general election. It's the question of whether the electorate in Beaconsfield think I will be able to represent their interests in Parliament. But as I say to you, I think we're several months away from this. And in the meantime, I'm not going to speculate on exactly where the state of our national politics are.
Several months?
Well, I think we are several months away, yes. I don't think there is going to be the trigger of a general election until after we have got an extension to Article 50. Indeed, to hold a general election without having that extension would be very dangerous. So, my understanding is it is likely, therefore, that the trigger for an election, if there is going to be one, will be after the Article 50 extension has been obtained. That suggests to me, if there is to be a general election, it's likely to be in late November or early December.
Dominic Grieve, thank you very much.